The text message came through on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of a client call. I saw my sister-in-law's name on the screen and let it go to voicemail. Whatever Renee wanted could wait 20 minutes. It couldn't wait 20 minutes. When I finally listened to the message, I had to play it twice because I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. Hey, so Mom and Dad wanted me to reach out about the anniversary dinner. It's black tie, obviously, and the guest list is really curated this year. With everything going on with Dad's firm and the Hargrove connection, we just think it might be cleaner if you sat this one out. You know how it is. No hard feelings, no hard feelings. No hard feelings. I set my phone face down on my desk and stared at the window for a long moment. Outside, the Chicago skyline was doing what it always does in October, turning grey and indifferent like it had somewhere better to be. I knew exactly what the Hargrove connection meant. My brother Wesley had been dating Celeste Hargrove for 4 months. Her father, Gordon Hargrove, had built one of the largest commercial real estate portfolios in the Midwest. He was old money and older opinions. The kind of man who assessed people the way you'd assess a property. Location, presentation, liability. And I was a liability. I am 31 years old. I have a 6-year-old son named Oscar who has his father's nose and my stubbornness and absolutely nothing else from that chapter of my life. I got pregnant during my second year at Northwestern Law. His father, a third-year who'd talked constantly about his 5-year plan, discovered that the 5-year plan did not include us. He made that clear with one conversation and no follow-up. I withdrew from the program 6 weeks later. My in-laws, former in-laws, though we were never actually married, which was its own source of shame for my family, never let me forget it. But it was my own parents, Robert and Patricia, who had perfected the particular art of the gentle dismissal. Never cruel enough to confront, always just slightly too quiet when my name came up, always just slightly too enthusiastic about Wesley's accomplishments at dinner. Your brother made partner, said with a specific brightness that meant, and what have you done? I hadn't corrected them in years. What was the point? They'd already written the story of who I was. Single mother. Almost lawyer. The daughter who'd chosen sentiment over sense. They didn't know about Meridian Analytics. They didn't know I'd spent the last 5 years building a financial forensics practice that worked exclusively with federal regulators and major institutional clients. They thought I worked at some consulting firm downtown, my mother's words, delivered with the faint tone of someone describing a participation trophy. They didn't know that 3 months ago, the SEC had brought my firm in as the primary independent analyst on a $2.3 billion securities fraud investigation. They didn't know that my signature was on the report that had just been filed under seal with the Eastern District of Illinois. They didn't know because I hadn't told them. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being underestimated by people who love you. It's not the clean exhaustion of hard work. It's the grey, sticky kind that accumulates in layers over years, each one thin enough to dismiss, all of them together weighing more than you want to admit. I'd decided a long time ago that I would rather carry that weight quietly than beg anyone to lift it. But Renee's voicemail had something in it I hadn't anticipated. Not the dismissal. I was used to the dismissal. It was the phrase, the Hargrove connection. The casual certainty that Gordon Hargrove's comfort mattered more than my presence at my own parents' anniversary dinner. That I was something to be managed, something to be hidden. I played the voicemail one more time. No hard feelings. I opened my laptop. My screen was full of the usual encrypted case files, client communications, the ongoing thread with the SEC's regional director, a calendar notification reminding me that I had a standing monthly call with a deputy director of the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority named Daniel Foss. Daniel and I had worked together for 2 years before he moved from private practice into his current role. He was one of the sharpest people I'd ever met, and one of the few who knew the full scope of what my firm actually did. I had a professional dinner with him that Friday. I looked at the calendar notification. Then I looked up the venue my mother had booked for their anniversary dinner. The Ashford Room at the Stratford Club, a private dining club on Michigan Avenue that seated maybe 40 people and required a membership most people in Chicago couldn't access. Then I picked up my phone and called Daniel. "Change of plans on Friday," I said when he picked up. "I have a suggestion on venue." There was a pause. "I'm listening." "The Stratford Club. My parents have a private dinner that evening, And I think it's time I stopped pretending I eat lunch at my desk every day. Another pause, longer this time. Then, Elise, what are you up to? Just a business dinner, I said. Bring your wife if she's free. Oscar would love to see the two of you. He laughed, a short, quiet sound. You know I trust your instincts more than almost anyone in this business. Fine. The Stratford Club. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. I hung up and looked at Oscar's latest drawing, which was taped to the wall next to my monitor. It was a dragon wearing a necktie. He'd labeled it in careful kindergarten letters, Dad Dragon. It made me smile every single time. Pack your good clothes, buddy, I said out loud to the empty office. We're going to a party. The week that followed was the kind of productive that only happens when you've made a decision and stopped second-guessing it. I wasn't operating from anger. I'd moved past anger years ago. Somewhere around the third time my mother suggested I look into paralegal work since I'd already done some of the coursework. Anger was a short-term fuel. What I was running on now was something quieter and significantly more efficient. I called the Stratford Club directly and reserved a table for 4 in the main dining room, not the private annex where my parents' party would be, but the central room, the one every guest passed through on the way to anywhere else in the building. I arranged for Oscar to have dinner with Daniel's wife and their kids at the family table adjacent. Kids' menus, crayons, the works. Oscar had been asking about their son for weeks. I did not buy a new dress. I had a navy silk sheath I'd worn to a Finray conference in Washington 2 years ago that had cost more than my first car. It had been sitting in a garment bag since then. I took it out, had it pressed, and left it at that. I did not tell my family I was coming. The Friday of the dinner, my mother called me at 4 in the afternoon. Hi, honey. The voice was warm and slightly performative, the way it always was when she was managing her conscience. I just wanted to check in. Renee mentioned she reached out. I hope you understand, it's just a complicated evening with the Hargroves and we want everything to go smoothly. I understand perfectly, Mom. You're not upset. I'm fine. Actually, I have a work dinner tonight, so it works out. Oh. Relief. Barely concealed. Good. That's good. We'll do something together soon. The 4 of us. Maybe Sunday brunch. Sure, Mom. Happy anniversary. I hung up and finished putting on my earrings. The Stratford Club smelled like cedar and old leather and money that had been in the same families long enough to stop trying to prove itself. The maître d' recognized me by name from the reservation and walked us to our table without ceremony. Daniel and his wife Catherine arrived at 7:15. Catherine hugged me immediately, then crouched down to Oscar's level. I heard you've been learning chess, she said. Oscar's entire face changed. I know how the knight moves. That's the hardest one, Catherine said seriously. You must be very smart. Oscar looked up at me with the specific expression of a child who has just been told something he already believed but needed confirmation on. I squeezed his shoulder and we followed the maître to the table. My parents' party was scheduled to begin at 7:30. The Stratford Club's layout funneled every guest through the main dining room on the way to the private annex. It was a function of the architecture, an old building with narrow corridors and a single central atrium, not something I'd engineered. I had simply chosen the table closest to the path. I was in the middle of a sentence about the Eastern District filing when the door opened. I heard my father before I saw him. Robert has a way of entering rooms that he's practiced for decades. The projected laugh, the hand extended before he's fully through the door. He was in his good tuxedo, the black wool one he'd had for 20 years. My mother was behind him in a cream gown, her hair set, her smile already assembled. Then Wesley with Celeste on his arm, a tall woman with the kind of posture that comes from being told repeatedly that you represent something. And behind them, Gordon Hargrove. He was shorter than I'd expected from the photographs. Late 60s, silver-haired, the practiced ease of a man who'd spent decades being the most important person in any room he entered. They were 15 feet from my table when my father stopped. It wasn't a gradual recognition. It was instantaneous and total, the way a circuit trips. He saw me, registered Daniel, registered Catherine, registered the measured professional ease of the table, and went completely still. My mother walked into his back. Robert, what? She looked past him, and her face did something complicated. A rapid rearrangement of expressions, none of them landing quite right. I set down my water glass. Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. I kept my voice warm. Genuinely warm. This wasn't a confrontation. Confrontations are messy, and they make everyone defensive, and they are confrontation. Confrontations are messy, and they accomplish nothing. Happy anniversary. You both look wonderful. My father opened his mouth, closed it. Daniel stood up. He was 6'2", former college rower, with the easy authority of someone who testifies before congressional subcommittees for a living. He extended his hand to my father. Daniel Foss, Deputy Director at FinRay. You must be Elise's father. She's mentioned your anniversary dinner. Happy to finally put a face to the name. My father shook Daniel's hand on reflex, the way you shake hands when your brain is 2 seconds behind your body. Yes. Robert Calloway. He caught himself, a flicker of something, pride, confusion, passing across his face. Daniel Foss from FinRay. I followed your work on the broker-dealer reforms. Impressive track record. Most of that credit goes to your daughter, Daniel said, completely relaxed. She was the one who caught the data pattern that held the whole framework together. I keep trying to get her to join us full-time, but she's too valuable where she is. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when a room recalibrates. Wesley cleared his throat. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, not quite guilt, not quite surprise, something in between. Celeste Hargrove was watching her father. Gordon Hargrove stepped forward. He had the deliberate movement of a man who chose his moments carefully. He looked at Daniel first. The way people in his world always cross-reference, identify the center of gravity, then locate yourself relative to it. Then he looked at me. Elise Calloway, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Gordon Hargrove. He extended a hand. I believe my attorney forwarded your firm's compliance report on the lakefront portfolio restructuring last month. He did. You found a disclosure gap that my own team had missed for 8 months. He paused. I flew to New York and fired 2 people after I read that report. I hope that's not too inconvenient, I said. A beat. Then Gordon Hargrove did something I genuinely had not anticipated. He smiled. A real one, not the performed version. Best money I've spent this year. If you're not already billing at your ceiling, you're leaving money on the table. I'd like to discuss a retainer arrangement when you have time. Wesley's face had gone the particular color of someone who has just realized the architecture of an entire situation was different than they understood it. Renee was standing slightly behind him, very still. My mother's hand had moved to her pearls. This was her tale. She'd done it my entire life. The unconscious reach when something disrupted her model of how the world was ordered. My father looked at me. Not through me. Not past me. At some disappointing version of me he'd constructed over the years. At me, Elise. His voice was lower than usual. Quieter. What is it you actually do, exactly? It was such a small question, 6 words. But I've been waiting 7 years for it, not the phrasing but the real thing underneath it, the actual looking, the actually wanting to know. I kept my voice even. I run a financial forensics firm. We work primarily with federal regulators, the SEC, FINRA, occasionally the DOJ, on securities fraud investigations. We also do independent compliance analysis for institutional clients. Right now, we're 7 weeks from completing the largest securities investigation this district has seen in about a decade. I have a team of 11 people. I make about $12,000 a week before the partnership distributions. The number landed in the silence like a stone in still water. My mother sat down in the empty chair at the table beside ours without being invited. She simply sat down, as if her legs had made the decision before she did. "Why didn't you tell us?" she said. Her voice was very small. Nothing like the managed warmth of the phone call earlier that afternoon. "Elise, why didn't you ever say anything?" I considered the question. I'd had years to think about it, and a clean answer had never arrived, only approximations. "Because every time I was in this family, I was the cautionary tale," I said. I was the thing that went wrong. I was the reason you stopped mentioning law school at Christmas. I was the story you told quietly at the country club about how sometimes kids make choices you can't understand. I picked up my water glass. I built something real, and I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to carry it in here like something I needed your permission to be proud of. Wesley made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. Elise, he started. I know you didn't write that voicemail, I said, looking at him directly. I know whose idea it was. I didn't look at Renee. I didn't need to. I'm not angry at you, Wes. I'm really not. But I need you to understand something. I waited until he was actually looking at me. Oscar is going to grow up watching how the people around him treat his mother. That's the only thing I actually care about right now, not this dinner. Not a contract or a seat at a table. Just what he sees. Wesley looked at Oscar, who was at the adjacent table, carefully explaining to Daniel's son the diagonal movement of a bishop using a breadstick. He looked back at me. I'm sorry, he said, quiet and real, without the scaffolding of excuse. I nodded. That was enough for now. My father had not spoken. He was watching me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Or maybe I had, years ago, before the story he'd told himself about me had hardened into fact. He looked for a moment like a man who understood that he had misread something important for a very long time and was only now arriving at the math. I owe you an apology, he said. The words came out careful and slightly stiff, like a man using muscles he hadn't exercised in years. A real one, not a Sunday brunch. I didn't rush to reassure him. I didn't say it's okay or don't worry about it. I'd spent too long reflexively smoothing the edges of other people's discomfort at their own behavior. I know, I said. We'll get there. Gordon Hargrove had already stepped back, moving his family toward the private annex with the practiced discretion of a man who knew when to create distance from a moment that didn't belong to him. At the door, he paused and looked back at me. Monday morning, he said. My office, 9 o'clock. I'll have my assistant confirm, I said. He nodded once and was gone. Dinner continued. Oscar ate approximately 1 bite of his pasta and spent the rest of the meal teaching Daniel's son a card game he'd invented himself, the rules of which appeared to change every 3 minutes. Catherine caught my eye across the table and smiled the smile of a woman who understands exactly what the evening had cost and what it had returned. My parents' party went on in the private annex. I could hear, occasionally, the muffled rise of voices and the clink of glasses. I didn't go in. I hadn't been invited, and I didn't need to be. At 9 o'clock, Oscar fell asleep against my arm in the back seat of the car, his mouth slightly open. One hand still clutching a breadstick he'd claimed as a chess piece, I drove home through the city in the particular quiet of an October night, the lakefront dark and wide and exactly as indifferent as it had been that morning. My phone was buzzing. I didn't look at it until we were parked in the garage. 6 texts from my mother, 4 from Wesley, 1 from Renee that said only, I shouldn't have sent that voicemail. I'm sorry I read them all. I didn't reply to any of them that night, not because I was punishing anyone. That had never been the point. But because I had learned after a very long time that my first obligation was to myself and to the small person currently asleep in the back seat with marinara on his collar. Everything else could wait until morning. I carried Oscar inside, got him into pajamas without fully waking him, and sat on the edge of his bed for a while in the dark, watching him breathe. He looked like his father around the eyes. He always would, but the way he'd spent the whole evening explaining made-up chess rules to a kid he'd just met, that relentless patient optimism, that certainty that the world would find his ideas interesting, that was mine. I'd given him that. I went back to the kitchen and made a cup of tea and sat at the table with my phone face up. There was an email from Gordon Hargrove's assistant confirming Monday's meeting. There was a case update from my team lead. There was a voicemail from my father. I listened to it. He talked for 3 minutes and 20 seconds. He didn't say anything new. There's only so much new a man can say in one evening. But he said the things he'd never said before, in the order that they needed to be said, without making me responsible for his feelings about them. It was a start. I set my phone down on the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard. Oscar's bike was still out there, one wheel half buried in the leaves I hadn't gotten to yet. I'd get to them this weekend, we'd probably jump in them first. I thought about Gordon Hargrove's offer. I thought about Daniel's standing offer to join the regulatory side. I thought about the 11 people on my team who had no idea their bonuses this year were going to surprise them. I thought about the look on my father's face, that first real look in years. I wasn't angry. I hadn't been angry since I started the car. What I felt was something much quieter than anger and much more durable. The specific satisfaction of a person who stopped waiting to be seen and simply became undeniable. There's a version of this story where I walk into that room and make sure everyone watches, where I engineer each moment for maximum visibility, maximum damage, maximum proof. I understand why that version is appealing. I've wanted it before, on harder nights than this one. But the version that actually happened, the business dinner that happened to be in the same room, the question my father finally asked, the apology that came because there was no other honest response to the truth, that version was worth more to me, because it didn't cost me anything I wasn't willing to spend. I wasn't there to punish my family. I was there to stop carrying their version of me around like it was the only one that existed. Oscar will not grow up watching his mother beg to be included. He will watch her walk into rooms and work. He will watch her eat pasta with federal regulators and talk about securities law and laugh at her son's made-up card games. He will understand, before anyone sits him down to explain it, that you do not earn your own worth. You build your life, and the people who are always looking for something to love in you find it eventually. The ones who don't, you wish them well and you keep moving. The leaves needed raking. The bike needed to come inside before the rain. There was a Monday morning meeting to prepare for and a case file to review and a 6-year-old who would wake up at 6:15 regardless of what time I went to bed. I finished my tea. I went to sleep. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that night at the Stratford Club, not the surface of it, the dinner, the silence, my father's face. The thing underneath it. The reason it unfolded the way it did. For years I made a choice that I didn't fully understand at the time. I kept my head down. I built something real. I didn't announce it. I didn't perform it for an audience that had already decided I wasn't worth watching. And what I've come to understand is that the quiet itself had a kind of integrity to it. It wasn't smallness. It was discipline. Every day I went to work and did the job well, not to prove anything to my parents, not to prepare for some eventual reckoning, just because the work mattered and Oscar was watching even when he was too young to know he was watching. That's the thing nobody tells you about the long game. It doesn't feel like strategy while you're living it. It feels like just surviving. Getting Oscar to school, getting yourself to work, filing the report that needs filing, answering the call that needs answering. One day at a time, mostly unglamorous, often exhausting. But those days accumulate. They compound, and eventually the person you've been building in the dark walks into a room in a navy silk dress and the room adjusts itself accordingly, not because you planned it, but because you became undeniable. What happened to my father wasn't punishment. I want to be clear about that, because I've turned it over enough times to be sure. He wasn't humiliated because I engineered his humiliation. He was simply confronted for the first time with the full accounting of what his assumptions had cost him. 7 years of not asking. 7 years of the comfortable story. 7 years of the country club version of me, the cautionary tale, the daughter who chose wrong. And then one evening, reality presented the invoice. That's how it works, not dramatically. Not with a speech or a scene, just the slow, inevitable return of cause and effect. The way you treat people is a choice you make every day, and those choices build something whether you intend them to or not. My parents built a version of our family that had no room for the real me, and when the real me showed up, the version they'd built couldn't hold. I'm not proud of their discomfort that night. I'm not. But I am proud of what I gave Oscar without meaning to. He sat at that table eating pasta and explaining made-up chess rules to a kid he'd just met, completely unbothered, completely himself. He doesn't know what financial forensics is. He doesn't know what FinRe stands for. But he knows his mother walks into rooms calmly. He knows she doesn't shrink. He knows she laughs during dinner with important people and still checks his collar for marinara on the way to the car. Children don't learn what you tell them. They learn what you show them every ordinary day before they're old enough to know they're taking notes. What I want, more than any contract or recognition or seat at any table, is for Oscar to grow up with an accurate picture of what it looks like to build a life with integrity, to work with honesty, to stay quiet not because you're afraid, but because you're focused, to extend grace to people who haven't owned it yet, because grace is a practice and not a reward. My father left a voicemail that night that I still haven't deleted. He said things he'd never said. It wasn't enough to fix 7 years, but it was real, and real is where everything worth having starts. I went to sleep that night with the leaves still unraked in the backyard and Oscar's bike still out in the October cold, and I slept better than I had in years. Not because I won something, because I'd finally stopped measuring my life against a standard that was never actually mine.